Welcome back. I'm Chris Hayes, in for Rachel Maddow, who has the night off. In his ongoing quest for relevance, Karl Rove has written a book, Courage and Consequence, My Life as a Conservative in the Fight. And to sell it, he's went on Today's Show this morning, where he tried to explain away the Bush administration's mishandling of Hurricane Katrina.
President of the United States, if he had dropped into New Orleans that morning, would have discombobulated recovery efforts. They would have had to have closed down the airspace. There would have been, you know, rather than a cargo plane coming in with rescue people, it would have been President Bush.
But that picture almost would have been was worse than no picture.
We should have gone to Baton Rouge, which is where the governor was and where the emergency disaster center was, and that's where we should have gone.
You also write in the book, we did not have the ability to get real-time information, so did not realize the initial reports we were getting were wrong. This is the President of the United States. Sure. Did anyone at the White House turn on the TV? We had real-time information.
Well, you know what? The media did not have real-time information. For example, the media led people to believe that there were snipers. So as a result, rescue personnel refused to go into some of the.
But we showed the suffering, though, at some of these places.
And that's the point. Is that you? For example, you didn't know about the suffering at the convention center until the government did, but the government should have known about it earlier.
You didn't know about the suffering at the convention center until the government did. But according to someone who was there, Mr. Rove still doesn't have his story straight about what happened in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. NBC News photojournalist Tony Zumbada, who shot that terrible scene at the convention center exclusively for NBC News, told us today that it was NBC News that called then FEMA director Michael Brown to alert him to the scene there. Until that moment, Brown didn't know about the convention center. Joining us now is Wayne Slater, senior political writer for the Dallas Morning News and co-author of Bush's Brain, How Karl Rove Made George W. Bush Presidential. Thanks for being here.
Great to be with you, Chris.
Well, what he said about Hurricane Katrina at least was a provable moment where Karl Rove is sharing misinformation with the American public. What else in the book is misleading?
Oh, there you can find. It didn't take me long before I found the first one. Just the first few pages, he talks about a 1990 race in which he was running against a liberal Democrat in Texas. An acquaintance of his, who was the FBI agent, came in and began investigating this race, and there were embarrassing disclosures in the newspaper. Now, in his book, Rove says, I didn't have anything to do with this. In fact, I would just read the newspaper to find out what was going on each day. Well, I'm one of the reporters that Karl was calling and was giving information, myself and some colleagues. And so he was very actively, trust me, Chris, he was very actively involved. But the other thing that Karl does is lets falsehood go without him correcting it, either denies a different argument or parses words. And the biggest example in the book that I've seen so far is really Scott McClellan. Scott McClellan asked him, were you involved in disclosing the identity of the CIA agent? He says he wasn't. Scott was sent out, and Rove understood what was going on to say something that wasn't true. And it really hurt Scott McClellan. It reminded me really of that scene in Animal House where the fraternity guys take in the pledge. Flounder says, we won't hurt your car. Win over his trust. When they wreck the car, then the fraternity guys tell him, hey, you screwed up. You shouldn't have trusted us.
Well, the Plame affair was one of the iconic examples of official malfeasance with the truth. The other big one, of course, was weapons of mass destruction. Rove writes in his book that without the threat of WMD, quote, the Bush administration itself would probably have sought other ways to constrain Saddam. Yet the vice president, end quote, yet the vice president, Dick Cheney, disagrees the war wouldn't have happened if they had known there were no WMDs. So who should we believe here?
Great, this is a great question. I've got either Rove or Cheney.
Yeah,
this
right,
is our
exactly.
choice. Can I have a light one?
It's a devil's choice.
I think I believe Karl in this case. And the reason I believe Karl is because of Colin Powell. Colin Powell has subsequently said that when he was sent to when he tried to investigate all the evidence, that he didn't get all the evidence. He didn't get specific information, and specific information about one of the key sources about Saddam Hussein's alleged catch of weapons of mass destruction. So if Colin Powell hadn't gotten that information, he never would have gone to the UN and made this speech. We never would have gone to war, and voila, I think Karl's right.
So I'm putting a tick mark here in my true-false column for Karl Rove after that. So Rove also in his book, he writes this really interesting line. He says, "I have become an adjective. There is something called a Rovian style of campaign, and it's meant as an insult." And then he goes on to defend his campaign record. You've done a lot of reporting and digging around what Rovian means and where that adjective comes from. Can you remind us why that term exists? And does Karl Rove deserve it?
He absolutely deserves it. You know, it began years and years and years ago here in Texas in the late 80s and early 90s, and it became conventional wisdom among us, we political operatives and the political reporters, that when a campaign that Karl was involved with, when there erupted dirty tricks or some kind of interesting and underhanded episode, then it was the mark of Rove. That was what it used to be called 20 years ago in Texas. If you look at the entire history of Karl Rove, he began his career as a young Republican, as a college Republican, with Lee Atwater teaching dirty tricks at seminars. There were the smears against Ann Richards when she ran against George Bush, raising questions about her sexuality. In the same year, exactly the same thing with a judge in Alabama. You look at the South Carolina attack on John McCain, the Whisper campaign, and the swift boating of John Kerry. The same thing happened in every case. One, Karl Rove was the consultant. Two, he denied any responsibility for any of it. And three, Karl's candidates benefited. So I think the nature of the Rovian campaign is very well established.
Wayne Slater, senior political writer for the Dallas Morning News and co-author of Bush's Brain, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Great to be with you.